This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
What is incel culture?
It stands for involuntary celibacy. So it's a group of people who have self-diagnosed that they are unable to match up with a romantic partner and designated celibate, but they don't want it to be that way, so that's involuntary. And so those people have their own arenas of gathering online, and they discuss in particular their views and attitudes to their state, blaming various parties, including women themselves.
Welcome to She Wasn't Born Yesterday, the pod that fearlessly chats about all things affecting us ladies who are 40 plus fabulous.
Well, and the guys that want to know what we think.
Well, them too. I'm Janet Evans, advertising creative.
And I'm Jenny Woodhouse, semi-retired social worker.
In other words, you're busier than ever. We're J&J and we're super thrilled you're with us for She Wasn't Born Yesterday. Well, today we are here to talk about intel. Can we influence what's influencing our teens? And I think both of us have seen that Netflix show, Adolescent.
I have seen it.
And in fact, over 96 million people globally watched it in the first 3 weeks. A lot of people just binged it because
Okay, so I wasn't the only one that did that.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a 4-part series. I don't know how you did that. But anyway, and it's if you haven't seen it, it's a 4-part series. It's a UK series about a 13-year-old schoolboy called Jamie Miller who kills a classmate. He stabs her 7 times. And it's about the resulting fallout on the boy, his fellow classmates, his psychologist, his family, even the detective who arrests him, who has a boy of a similar age. And spoiler alert, it turns out that Jamie has been immersed in the manosphere.
In the what?
Manosphere.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good word. On his computer at home, behind closed doors in his room, engaging in the incel culture. That's INCEL, culture.
Okay.
So to help us understand what that's all about and how it could potentially lead a young boy to murder someone, and to help us 40 plus fabulous parents keep our teenage boys safe in a dangerous online world, our guest today is a man heavily involved in this sphere, but he's not part of the manosphere.
See what you did.
He is, in fact, Marshall Ballantine Jones. Marshall, welcome back to She Wasn't Born Yesterday.
Thanks for welcoming back. It's great to be back. It was an adventure last time. I'm looking forward to today, whatever it brings.
Thank you, Marshall.
I can see you remember it well.
Yeah.
You were our amazing guest on episode 6 of She Wasn't Born Yesterday, talking about women and the influence of porn on our teens, one of your specialty areas. And today you're hopefully going to help us navigate this manic manosphere of incels and influencers and understand what it's all about and why it is such a compelling influence on teenagers especially. First of all, I guess, let's just ask, what is incel culture and what is this manosphere?
Okay, let's start with the second question, the manosphere. The manosphere is this description, broad description of online communities, forums, websites, chat groups that emphasize traditional masculinity and generally have some sort of reaction against modern feminism. So that can take its form in many guises, and from extreme examples of violent misogyny and hate towards women to amplifying traditional values, roles, and behaviours amongst the gender groups. And the incel culture is a very small subset of this manosphere broad community culture. It stands for involuntary celibacy. So it's a group of people who have self-diagnosed that they are unable to match up with a romantic partner and designated celibate, but they don't want it to be that way, so that's involuntary. And so those people have their own arenas of gathering online, and they discuss in particular their views and attitudes to their state, blaming various parties, including women themselves, also the smaller proportion of males who are brilliantly successful at getting 80% of the women, and talk often in tones of hatred and bitterness and toxicity.
So when you say traditional male kind of values, what do you mean by that?
The idea of the manosphere, you got to understand, people who are classified as part of manosphere groups, generally they don't describe themselves as, oh, we're manosphere people, right? It's a title that's imposed from outside, normally by journalists or critics or social commentators. And people get lumped into this category called manosphere. And the people that they lump in there just don't always agree with each other or have the same values. So I'll give you two very polarized examples. One is Andrew Tate. He's mentioned in the Adolescent show. Anyone who's been in the online space will know who he is, and we'll probably talk about him later at length. But yeah, he's a guy who is overtly misogynistic, who is potently aggressive, and who has this championing type of aura for younger males. And then there's Jordan Peterson. Now, Jordan Peterson would be abhorred to be classified as part of the manosphere, but he is described as part of the manosphere by others because what's he done? Well, he's taken quite a stance on elevating male responsibility and calling men to be accountable for their actions and choices. He's also, in his research, and he was quite famous when he first launched himself into the international sphere for highlighting that there are at times gender differences in behaviour and personality traits. And so he's been lumped into it as well. And he's been extremely critical of Andrew Tate, and Andrew Tate's been extremely critical of Jordan Peterson. But to people who just say they're part of the manosphere, those distinctions don't matter. And so just by saying that, you can already say it's a muddy arena. There's no clear-cut answer to what classifies one as being in the ideology of manosphere and so forth. But I think the general agreement is that there is certain resistance against modern feminism and even a blame game for men being ostracised in society and bias against them. And when you start seeing that language and those sorts of conversation happening, then that's where people sort of get lumped into the space.
And so the folks that would classify themselves in the incel sort of subculture, they actually say, yes, I'm an incel, do they? They
do. Now, you may have heard of the red pill, blue pill, black pill concepts. Red pill, blue pill first arose from the Matrix. The idea, if you take the blue pill, you stay in ignorance. If you take the red pill, you're exposed to the truth. Well, there were various people in this masculinity discussion, particularly a prominent author named Rollo Tomasi, who wrote a book called The Rational Man in about 2013. And he was saying to the men, you need to take the red pill and you need to wake up and understand what life's like and what women are like, and you need to step up and own your future, right? So he used the red pill language. But the incels, they've adapted this black pill concept, which is like they've surrendered to the diabolical situation of their life. Their plight is fixed. There's no changing it. And so they have resigned to being an incel forever, and that's just the way life is, and therefore they have a license to be bitter and they have a license to blame.
Wow. And, I mean, it seems ridiculous because you can't predict what's going to happen tomorrow. You might meet someone fabulous and, why would you want to kind of restrict your choices in that way?
Well, look, the incel community, people need to realise that there's not a lot of them. Right. So if you try to guess what proportion of the male population incels in the Western world, based on those who are members of the forums and discussion groups and so forth out there, it would be about 0.02% of the male population. It's a very small. And there's been some emerging research on the type of person most likely to identify as an incel. There's about 60% would be white, but there's 40% who are multi-ethnic, and there's 30% who have been diagnosed as on the autistic spectrum, while about 74% of them will self-diagnose as being on the autistic spectrum. And so it gets a little bit, let's just say there's room for more work and understanding these people and realising that there's often people with their own issues that they're dealing with. And another interesting thing about them is when they studied their violent traits, the vast majority of them, like 75% of them, would be classified as pacifists and who would not condone violence, and only about 5% would justify violence in a normal reactionary sense. So we're talking about a very, very, very small percentage of men who are going to be at risk of committing violence in response to their frustrations.
And so do you think the movie Adolescence is a real portrayal, like an accurate portrayal? Yeah.
What's going on?
Look, I don't think it is. I don't think it is, though it does tap into some very real issues. Like, it is a piece of art. It's fictional. It's incredibly well performed and acted. But I think the script writers were trying to cram in too many possibilities into the one character. And setting an alarming emotional panic amongst those watching. But they failed to understand, I think, the points and areas in society where boys are most susceptible to go off the rails and what are the major influences that will lead them that way. And that, for me, was a bit of a smokes and mirror outcome of that show. They created euphoria about incel culture when that's extremely minor. The Andrew Tate culture might be a little bit more prominent amongst younger teenage boys. But you got to think, here's another thing people don't realise. With incels are generally very resentful against sexually successful men. And Andrew Tate is a highly successful man when it comes to sexual prowess, right? He's athletic. He's had many, many sexual partners. He's been a pimp for some decades. He's the sort of guy they would call a Chad, right? I don't like Chads. Some of them do admire Andrew insofar as they admire how he takes down his feminist opponents and makes outlandish and outrageous statements against women. They like that, but otherwise they've got no alignment with Andrew Tate. And if someone is in the incel culture, they're not going to be led astray by Andrew, I think. And most teenage boys won't be in the incel culture and influenced by Andrew Tate, but they are likely to be perhaps influenced by Andrew Tate apart from that. So there's some things we can talk about there later. I've done a bit of diagnosis there, but I hope that explains that there is really a murky area here, and I don't think the show quite captured that. The show also didn't even acknowledge the impact that pornography has on formation of teenage boys. And I know I talked about this last time on the show, but listen, this has to be said right from the bat when we're going to talk about teenage boys and where their risk factors is. Like 70 to 90% of teenage boys now are regularly looking at very misogynistic, very aggressive, very self-indulgent and entitled sexualized material. That's a huge proportion of boys. That's a lot more than the 0.02% of males at risk of the incel stuff. And when they deal with that in the show, when the boy refers to porn, it's just passed off as, well, everyone looks at porn and they move on. But that's the engine room for what's shaping boys' thinking and behaviours behind closed doors, much more than these potentially toxic influences.
And what age do these boys, do you think, generally start checking out pornography?
Well, we know just from worldwide studies and local studies that the average age that they'll see porn is about 11 to 12.
Wow.
And that's average. Yeah, by the time we're talking about 13, 14 years old, there'd only be a fraction of the boys who haven't been exposed to pornography, and there'd be a vast majority of them who are regularly engaging with it, especially if they've already got a smartphone.
What is it about that age group, though, do you think? Like, it is such a confusing time for teenage boys, I think, to grow up. Like, there's so much social media, there's so many different channels, platforms, there's TikTok, Meta, YouTube, Snapchat, WhatsApp. Why are they so influenced at this particular age and stage in life?
Well, this is a developmental stage of life that forever and a day has been significant for a period of shaping boys and girls socially. That's where they're undergoing enormous neurological change. The medial prefrontal cortex is rapidly expanding. That's the part of the brain that's responsible for social engagement and for that sense of identity and belonging and relating and assessing relationships. And so this is exploding. And so for all teenagers, belonging, being part of a cohort, being approved, being validated, this is all central to who they are. And so it's very easy for them at that point to migrate away from, say, the previous family culture or other childhood cultures into these new arenas, because they will find their validation, they'll find their meaning, they'll find their purpose, and they'll find an echo back from others, and that becomes the whole life for them.
And I guess it's a community, isn't it? If you kind of find that like-minded group of people, like supposedly the character Jamie did in Adolescence. But I was saying to Jenny before, I found it difficult to believe from his character in the series that he would be able to murder a young girl, like stab her 7 times. Like, it just didn't seem to fit to me with how he was portrayed in the series. What did you think about that?
Yeah, so he's well-educated.
Yeah.
He's, you know...
He was emotionally aware.
Needs for nothing, emotionally aware.
Yeah, just didn't seem to ring true.
He seemed a little young at 13 wasn't, physically developed particularly. So, what are your thoughts?
Look, as I said, it was a piece of ambitious fiction. If there is a child with the wild mood swings and the volatility that was displayed by Jamie in episode 3, I'm not a clinical psychologist, but my bet would be on that kid's got a lot of deeper issues going on. And here's the big inconsistent piece for me, is that the majority of adolescents who develop serious personality disorders, whether it be psychopathy or narcissism or borderline or so forth, those guys have some sort of major childhood trauma. And I can't see that happening in that family. That family seems to be a tight family. The dad's a bit of a bloke, but he's engaged. Kid had his dad around all the time. The mum was loving, the mum was engaged as well. They were relatively stable. There wasn't regular signs of violence or harm or fear. So it's just hard to connect all the dots and say that kid's going to end up there because of a period of late night hanging out on forums online, listening to people dialogue about how girls should give guys what they want.
But is that the danger of these forums, that they will just seep into someone's consciousness, whether they have a great family life or not, whether they can just get to a young person and
or how much
influence
time
them?
the young person spends in the forum as well. Yeah.
Look, these things are a risk. And where they become a risk is any area that you spend a lot of time on online can become central to your thinking and feelings. If it's reinforced with dopamine or other displacing chemicals or just deep feelings. So, for example, if you're spending all your time on eating disorder TikTok clips, which a lot of girls have done, well, what happens is that the girls will increase their risk rapidly of developing eating disorders themselves. If you spend a lot of time looking at sexualized media like pornography, you're going to start thinking and desiring and acting more sexual, and you're going to take sexual risks. And so that's a big thing. Now, if you are in the space of listening to people moan and groan and display deep misogynistic views and so forth, and that's the only place you're in and that's what preoccupies you, yeah, it can take over you. These are risks. And so I don't want to underplay that risk, but I just think it's the probability of that happening in our teenage boys such that they will go from being indoctrinated into a certain mindset to suddenly becoming a killer.
Yeah.
That's just a step too far, I think, for most.
Yeah.
But what I do see, and I've got to say this, because I go around to many schools across the year speaking to students, males and females, to staff, to school communities, and engaging with them on their beliefs and their behaviours. I do see a rapid increase over the last few years of overt sexualised behaviours from males to females, whether it be to students or to teachers. I see a lot more disrespect. I see a lot more candid, open, sexualised comments, things like sexual moaning, sexual harassment, sexual jokes, sexual comments, references to porn, trying to solicit access to selfies, nude selfies. Even now, the rise of AI porn, where we see people can turn those closest to them, if they've got a photo of them, into porn stars.
Oh, my goodness.
Deepfakes.
I didn't know that was a thing.
Really?
So that stuff is on the rise. Now, is it the forums that's going to take them to there, or is it these two things? One, is it going to be just the sheer volume of sexualized content that they're looking at that's just normalizing this? And two, what is it their peer groups, the normalized standards amongst their friends? And I would say those two things are far more likely to raise the risk of someone becoming overtly sexual and aggressively sexual, as I think we're meant to see Jamie was in adolescence. And interestingly, his mates, they weren't in on this in the way that he was. The mates didn't, I get the impression, condone the steps that he finally took. So I just didn't see the peer pressure there in that show. But I think in real life, peer pressure is a massive thing. And that's where we see the boys acting as cohorts, or as I often say, packs of hyenas. You can see them do and act and say the most horrible and traumatic things just in a standard typical school, even a Christian school, even a good quality sandstone Christian school. It's happening. It's happening at an increased rate. And I put it, as I've said already, and I'll say it again, primarily down to pornography and pornified culture, which is giving this license.
And do you think, Marshall, that that's because the pornography is getting more explicit or prevalent?
It is both, and look, it's been pretty explicit for a long time, and the standards are getting worse and worse as each year rolls on. But it is frequency, I think, prevalence of use and access, and that age when they first start. These are the big correlating factors to how their attitudes and behaviours will be later on. They'll be more sexualised, more desirous of sexual behaviours, sexual relationships, more aggressive in their behaviours, more misogynistic, more sexist, the earlier that they started, and then also the more frequently.
Why won't they just grow out of it when they realise they're being an idiot?
Well, some do mature, but this is the thing about the social experiment that's happening at this generation. We're only realising now just how deeply the impact of those exposures are at those formative brain change years.
Yep.
So, for example, the Jonathan Haidt book, The Anxious Generation, which many of you might be aware of and have read, focuses in on the impact of the smartphone on mental health and well-being and academic behaviours and social behaviours. He doesn't really tap in on pornography much in his work, but he knows it's an area that's got to be part of it. But what he's done is he's shown that critical age of 11 through to 14 is the age where what happens sticks the longest in terms of going into adulthood and not growing out of things. And so that's where the bedding down of depression and anxiety and insecurity is just overcoming the next generation. Well, what's also getting bedded down there for the male generation is overt, perverted, sexualized permission and normalization. And we haven't yet got to the end of where this leads them in their adult years, but we know sexual assaults are up across the Western world. Sexual harassment is up. I think these are your litmus tests for saying things aren't going to get better, and the chance of them growing out of a lot of these attitudes and behaviours is getting slimmer and slimmer as each year rolls on.
And is it the same effect on teenage girls? Are they undergoing the same kind of experiences online?
Girls and guys do, in terms of statistically, slide into different areas of interest. Guys are more overtly interested in sex. Like if you just break down what social media behaviours boys and girls engage with, they're quite different. Girls like Snapchat and Instagram, guys like TikTok, and they like YouTube. Why? Because guys like content about stuff and girls like relationships about lives. And so already what happens is that the big tech companies hone in on their gender stereotypes and start bombarding them through the algorithms with content that's going to heighten their own interests and suck them into a narrative that fits their gender and state. So girls are equally susceptible, but they're going to be susceptible to stuff which will be less interesting for the guys and vice versa. So even when it comes to pornography, I mean, this makes sense, I'm sure, to most of your audience. Only a small proportion of girls will look at porn at the rate that guys do. About 5% of girls will look at porn the same rate as the average guy. That's a very small number.
Yeah.
And only about 20 to 30% will be interested in it some sort of lesser extent. But for guys, when it comes to following lifestyle influences, when it comes to obsessing about their appearance, that's a minority of guys go there. Some do. Some guys get quite hooked up on their appearance, but that's more likely to be a girl thing. And so girls seem to be more susceptible to the negative body image and status and so forth from social media than boys do. Girls are far more likely to get higher rates of depression and anxiety because of their use of social media than boys were. That's not to say boys don't get depression or anxiety, but the cause and effect here for girls is social media. And so I just think it highlights they're just as susceptible as boys, but in different ways.
Although it's really interesting because you were talking about Andrew Tate before, and he is like, we don't want to glorify him, definitely, but he is one of the world's most influential and toxic misogynists. He's now banned from TikTok, but you can still find him there because I did. But he actually talks about women need to be led. They crave a strong, dominant man to guide them. A woman's worth is determined by her ability to please and satisfy a man, and they're attracted to men who are successful and ambitious. And I think the body image was a big thing with him too, like, because he was very buff and, you know, he was saying this is what you've got to look like to kind of attract women.
Well, okay. Andrew Tate, I've been following this guy for a while, and I got to say, the guy's a clown. He's also a very clever clown.
Yes.
He wrote, before he even got wealthy, he was a world champion kickboxer. So he was always athletic and always muscular and always good looking. His pathway to success came in the early 2010s when he and his brother pioneered a series of webcam pornography websites where they found that if they got some girls to take off their clothes, live stream them, people would throw money at them. And they upscale this to industrial levels over at Romania and have literally 70 to 90 girls at a time in rooms of their mansion doing this. And they made millions and millions and millions out of these girls, right? He came to prominence in the public space after this when he was booted off Big Brother in the UK.
Right.
Because of some online misogynistic behaviours. And so this is where he became really clever. He worked out that social media was something to harness, and he worked out that the people most interested in him were teenage boys. And so he wired his whole business and enterprise into sending messages that would get them in.
And in case you haven't heard of Andrew Tate or the types of things that he says, here's a little example.
Someone breaks in the house, I'm not sending her to fight. It's my job, right? I have to risk my life to protect her. So when someone doesn't break in the house and I ask her for breakfast, I expect it to be made.
Do you think that women are property?
I think my sister is her husband's property, yes. When a bride is walking down the aisle to marry the groom, the father walks next to her and gives her away.
And so he says a lot of things. Those things you quoted before, a string of countless examples of just gratuitous, chummy, misogynistic comments, which really any mature man anywhere in the world is going to roll his eyes at and say, yeah, obviously a person who thinks like that's not in a relationship because it doesn't work that way. But to the boys, it gets in the audience. So what Andrew is he's a chameleon. He keeps going where the hits are. He keeps trying to manipulate the algorithms, and he keeps trying to generate traffic to make money. That's what drives him. The guy is a money-making grub, and he'd do anything to get it. And so I say that because I want to distinguish between the things that he says, which may be influential to an impressionistic 13-year-old boy who doesn't have the worldview or the experience or the capacity to discern that a lot of this is just entertainment. But it's actually what he does, which I'm more concerned about, because what he does is he models something. He models hatred to women. And he does that in the way that he monetizes their bodies for profit. And he set up various courses, attempted to run various programs, including a self-described university, as well as various programs and courses on Spotify and other places, which thankfully have been taken down because of great work from activists like Collective Shout.
Right.
Those things model a deeper problem. And this is where I think the concern is amongst educators and carers at schools, is they're seeing boys en masse imitate this tacit disrespect and discrimination, which is much deeper, not so in the face of people, but just they won't acknowledge a female teacher, for example. They'll just pass off comments to them when they're getting in trouble, like, oh, you've got your period or something, miss, and things like that. And we're seeing a big rise in that sort of tone, and that's where I think the influence of Andrew Tate's behaviour comes through loudly, and why people like him in the so-called manosphere really need to be understood more and critiqued and exposed.
So, Marshall, has there been any research done on the view of teenage girls, of teenage boys who are like that? Are they attracted to that?
Look, there's various surveys that have been done. Though I'll give you my straw poll research, because when we were at the schools, we asked the girls what they think. We asked them. And I can tell you universally, they are repelled by that type of behaviour. They hate it. They run from it. It's such a turn off to them. And I tell this to the boys, right? I put it out there, say, this is what they're saying about you. Are you like this? Half of them go quiet because they are. And then I tell them, I say this, you got to understand, this is going to diminish your chances of being attracted to any of these girls, because they're not like that. And they have much better standards than the low bar that you're setting yourself with this type of disrespect.
So what do the boys think that they stand to gain from having that attitude to women?
Well, get back to your earlier question about what's happening for the teenage boys this time. They're trying to find a place to belong. They're trying to find meaning. They're trying to find status. They're trying to find a sense of self-worth and importance. This is all washing around in them constantly, these identity questions. And they see this as a pathway to look tough amongst their mates. This is a pathway to look like a champ. Getting a trophy girl might be particularly appealing to their esteem. Of course, they've gone through puberty. Generally, by this stage, their sexual system is actually raging like bulls. And so they're actually, if I could just use the phrase, horny. And so they're constantly thinking about sex as well. And so a lot of that comes into this, and they'll be fueling that and aggravating that if they're on looking at a lot of porn and masturbating a lot as well, which to the younger generations now, that is, again, these are badges of honour. The porn you look at, the frequency of your masturbation and so forth, there's no shame there. This is stuff that they brag about. And so
bragging rights. Yeah.
Yep, this all fuels their inclination to be deceived into thinking that these behaviours will actually make them appealing and attractive. And also that, and if it's not, who cares, because I'm a man and who are you to tell me what to do?
So I guess the answer here is just take their smartphones away, yes?
Oh, look, there's lots of answers here, but I'm going to say I think at least one of a range of important strategies is we need to diminish the frequency that they're online. And some smartphone access really has to be part of that. I don't see why a kid under the age of 16 needs a smartphone. If they need to text mum because they missed the bus, if they need to do some basic communication, get the Nokia brick. It's still out there. Get a dumb phone. That's all they need. They don't need it. They want it because everybody else has it. And it opens them up to so much stuff. But they're not ready neurologically for that stuff. The big tech companies know they're not ready for it, and they're exploiting it by making things so addictive. And so this is not adding up to be helpful for them. And I know a lot of parents say, well, you know what, my kid's more mature than that. Or they'll say they need to learn how to navigate the boundaries. They need to be given the scope to make mistakes and the scope to be able to learn how to cope and discern. I hear of that. But we don't say that to kids with cars. We still say, well, Johnny's 9. He's been go-karting since he was 3, so he should be able to drive a Hilux. No, we still wait till he's 16 and he's got his L's, and then after that, his P's, and we make him go through all the steps, because we know, behaviourally speaking, he's not ready to be able to handle such a responsibility. And it is equally true for the tech world. They aren't neurologically and developmentally ready for the myriad of messages that are coming there. So that's one reason why you definitely want to diminish their access. But there are other important factors as well, guys, which I think we need to be reminded of. The first and foremost is just the parent culture that's set at home. So 2 things there. Parents really need to appreciate the power of their frequent communication with their kids. Parents need to engage with their kids more. They need to understand their kids' worldview. They need to talk through stuff. They need to be there guiding and explaining and setting the standards and the vision for what's right and wrong and what they expect and what they feel and believe about the topics that we've talked about today, from respecting women to pornography to aggressive behaviours and so forth. We need to have that discussion, because the parents who converse more with kids and have an open dialogue end up having kids who are more emotionally stable, stronger self-esteem, better social behaviours, and are less interested in misogynistic thoughts. And then parents need to bed down proactive, thought through and disciplined restrictions and structures at home. There've got to be standards that you enforce. We talked about phones. They shouldn't have any devices in their bedrooms. We should have times when they're online and times when they're not. We should have a plan for them over the week where we're monitoring what they do, or at least we're setting things for them to do that are not screen related, like whether it be music practice or sport or social engagement or church time or other interests as well as their school time. We want to make sure that our kids are being fed good stuff and have good things to do. Another important factor I just to say is their friends. I alluded to this before, that friends become more and more powerful as they get older. By the time kids are 18, what you as a parent will be able to do by influencing them is so minimal now. You've already done your job. That was all set up the years before. Now it's everyone else around them. So if you're trying to recover by censoring their friends in their late teens, you've missed the boat. But you can do that in primary school and early high school. You need to be aware of who their friends are, and you need to make sure that they're around not only decent friends, but you need to get to know the families of those friends and understand what their values are too, so that you can select and get your children aligned with friends of the same values, because that goes a massive way. And as they get a little bit older, it'll be those friends that set the standards and the culture and what's normal amongst each other, and that will be very powerful for what's acceptable and virtuous and aspirational for your own kid.
But Marshall, why aren't people doing this already? Like, why are parents allowing their kids to have smartphones? Why are they not meeting their friends? Why? Surely people realise these things?
Well, it's not intuitive unless you're putting out fires, right? And this is the issue. Like, a lot of modern parents are so busy. Parents didn't think through how they were going to do things in their primary and high school years for their children at the times when they were doing the early childhood periods. And so they maybe set up bad habits where an iPad was a good pacifier or dummy when the kid needed to be distracted. A lot of parents just didn't think these issues were going to be high risk for their child. And one of the things that I discovered in my research was that when a parent tries to gauge if their kid's got an issue based on their mood or their behaviours, the quality of your relationship with your child actually is a very poor indicator of what they're getting up to online. Because kids, a lot of these behaviours are so normalised amongst them and their friends that they can basically parallel that life with the home life and the parents won't know. And this is actually the interesting finale of the adolescent show. The parents was dawning on them that they perhaps could have stepped up and done a better job. And it's absolutely true, they could have. But at the same time, they weren't aware that there was no signs to read from the normal conversations with their kid day in, day out, because they aren't very good indicators anymore. So parents need to actually be more engaged with what their kids are watching, what they're listening to, who they're hanging out with, what they're inspired by, what their aspirations are, what their feelings are. Got to work harder than perhaps previous generations of parents have done to bridge the gap and keep the conduits open and be there and be present in their kids' progress through this very complicated world.
Yeah, because a teenager will only tell you what they want you to know, won't they?
If there's a risk of them getting into trouble, they're not going to tell you much more, right? That's
true.
That's their nature, right? And we get that. We were the same. But the parent whose kid does come and confess to something, I saw porn, this happened, I'm in trouble, that parent should take that as a massive compliment, because that kid's trusted them. It's the parents that don't get the kid who done that. That's where the concern is.
Yeah. You know, when you see influencers like Andrew Tate, you think, oh, man, wouldn't it be great if he was actually promoting and influencing kids to do really healthy things? You know what I mean? Like the power of this person, the charisma and all of that sort of thing, and at this impressionable age. Wouldn't that be fantastic? Do you know any influencers like that, apart from you, Marshall? You should be an influencer.
I doubt it. I think I missed my boat. I'm not muscular enough or good looking. Anyway, no, listen, there are countless good influences much closer to home to our boys, and we need to be aware of these, preferably their own fathers. If for most that's a possibility. I know for some families it's not, and I'm sure there's some listening to your podcast who are painfully aware that this is not an option for them. But there are males that are nearby that we can get the kids connected to, and there's school teachers that love and value the kids and who want to be present in their choices and decisions. And there's possibilities at the local church or the local club or the local sporting group where there are great influences. And so I don't think you would write off that there's not many options nearby, but there are also some positive guys further afield in internet land that are worth listening to, at least engaging with. I just think parents need to be aware of who they might be and do a bit of filtering before they give a green light. Like, I'm not going to promote the guy, but I think Jordan Peterson has had a very positive influence on a generation of young males. In fact, we know statistically that the 25 to 35 year age group has been very indebted to Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life work, if only because he told them you can stand up and be responsible, so start doing it, right? So they started to hear a voice from someone who was saying, guys, don't sit there and lick your wounds and be down on yourself. Step up and be responsible. They just needed to get that little wake-up call. So boys are always looking to be inspired by someone, be a sporting star or a celebrity or a musician or a rapper or someone. So their inclination is always to look up. And so we need to look around so that we can shepherd them into the arena of decent people who can do that. I think things like the local church youth group could be a great place to see that take fruit.
And you're the CEO of an organisation called Digi Help. So how do you help kids, or how does the organisation help kids?
My company, Digi Help, is a publishing and consultancy company which works in schools, primarily independent and Catholic schools. What I do is I provide school programs for PDHPE and also do student talks to both males and females, primary and high school, and also professional development for teachers and parent talks to parents. And so Digi Help has the mission of empowering the school communities to be able to respond to the online threats, the online sexualization issues and relationship issues. And so the mission, insofar as it's there to help schools, so we like to partner with schools as well and get into their community and help them troubleshoot their own tailored situations, because not every school's got their own unique challenges, and so we like to help them develop that as well. And I've been able to work with some school partners over the years to develop some pretty great initiatives on respect and relating and things like that. So that's Digi Help. I know you didn't ask it, but while I'm here, I have the church. I have my church ministry called Resist as well, which is for those struggling with pornography addiction. Resistprogram.org. So that's a different ministry, but that's for churches. So Resist helps churches. Digi Help helps schools.
Okay, but can anybody tap into those two different resources?
Yeah, if you wanted to tap into Digi Help, go to digihelp.io. And you can just fill out a form there and I can get in touch with me. And if you're interested in support for your church, whether it be for group work or for speaking or for consulting and just help working through your own context, resistprogram.org. Those two will reach me. And I'm very happy to talk with whoever.
Wow, but there's only one of you, Marshall. Although I think
that's a good thing.
Yes, we discussed that last episode. There should be more of you. I guess finally, to wrap up, it's been absolutely amazing talking to you again. But what are some of the signs that our kids or grandkids might be sort of spiralling into this very unsafe world? And if anyone listening is worried, what do you suggest they do?
Well, I think the first thing you want to be observing is, are they spending a lot of time online? That alone is an issue. And where? Because if there's secrecy involved, the risk factor just goes through the roof. You want to look for mood changes as well. If there's signs of increased depression or anxiety, girls tend to have an inclination to develop depression and anxiety in the adolescent years in response to socializing and identity issues. Boys tend to not get there as quickly. Boys tend to have a buffering, space before they get down on how people think about them. But then they can also revert into serious mental health struggles, which can develop into things like aggression, mood swings, suicide ideation. And so you want to look for the behavior changes. Now, it's always been a truism that kids between year 8 and year 10 have mood swings, and a lot of that's a neurological and biological sort of outcome. But you'll know your own kids, and you'll need to observe whether the things that are coming out of their mouth compulsively are no longer consistent with what you thought. So are there sexualized comments that are suddenly being said? Are there disrespectful comments, misogynistic comments, things like that? Once you start hearing and seeing those sorts of behaviors, your alarm bells should be raging. And I would suggest that you have a serious intervention as early as possible and try and circuit break any potential things. You might want to also investigate who the friends are that they're seeing, what's happening perhaps on the train or the bus going to or from school. Talk to their year master, talk to their pastoral care teachers and things like that, and try to troubleshoot what's behind these behaviour changes, because it may be just a normal thing, but it may be the sign that they're getting seriously hooked into some bad stuff that can lay some very dark seeds in their lives.
Well, Marshall, we could talk about all of this stuff for a very, very long time, but you don't have this time. So we are going to thank you so, so much for chatting to us about what's influencing our teens and can we influence that? And I think the answer is yes. And we just really, really appreciate you coming on and chatting to us about it on She Wasn't Born Yesterday.
And Marshall, thank you so much for the hard work that you do in this whole area. There are not many folks who are willing to dive into this kind of information, so thank you for that.
I'm telling you, we need more Marshalls.
We need more
keep
Marshalls.
saying that,
We do.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's always an adventure and a pleasure.
Thanks for your company. What did you think of this episode?
Well, tell us everything, Gorgi, with a cheeky review on Apple Pods. We'd love to know what you reckon about our topics and our guests. And us.
And we look forward to your company next time on She Wasn't Born Yesterday.
Hope 1032. Thanks for listening.